So I learned something really fascinating today. It's related to Tungara frogs in Panama. So this researcher found that the male frog has two different sounds as part of their song. One is a chime and one's a chuck. And one's a little lower frequency, one's a little higher frequency, the chuck. And apparently the chuck is really important for mating. Like the females love the chuck. And then they're wondering, like, why do the males do it more often? You know, if it's so easy to mate with a female when you do a chuck, why don't you do a chuck? And then they found out that whenever they did the chuck, that made them at risk for these bats that would eat them. So the chuck would attract these bats that would kill these males. So that's the reason why they didn't do the chuck as much. They also found that these frogs had two different inner ears, whereas we have one. And their inner ears, one recognizes the whine and the other one recognizes the chuck. So they have in their development over evolution to recognize these mating calls. And they also found 8 species that also have these two different inner ears. But the strange thing was that these other species didn't have the chuck in their mating call. And they're like, well, why is that happening? And they basically said that there's an ancestor that had these chucks, and they didn't think that the chuck was like this new thing. Oh my gosh, this is new thing, mating thing. They actually think that that chuck is an older version, meaning that an ancestor had that ability to recognize the chuck, but because it was so dangerous, for example, the bat eating the frogs, that these other species lost their ability or their need or their desire to have the chucks. So I guess the bottom line, why is that important? It's important because it showed that their ability to use the chuck or their desire had fallen off because that's what allowed the species to survive. But basically what it shows is that this species, like pretty much a lot of species in the animal kingdom, have mating rituals, beauty, whatever aesthetic it is, that literally is chosen just because it's aesthetic, but could have a massive effect or risk to their propagation of their species. And that's the fascinating thing about our sexual selection, that literally we choose just for aesthetics, not to survive longer, which is so fascinating.